We'll end this unit in what would become the Netherlands, but at this point is part of Flanders and then the Holy Roman Empire. The Netherlands were an epicenter for the religious debates and then the religious wars that broke out across Europe in the 16th century. To add to the complications, Flanders and Holland were now ruled by the Habsburg family, the first by Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, the ruler who called Luther to appear at the Diet of Worms, and then his son Philip II of Spain, who was the political leader of the Counter-Reformation, and we'll hear more about him in our next unit. In 1550, Charles V passed the Edict of Blood, which made Protestantism punishable by death. But Charles didn't really enforce this edict. He was too busy fighting France to bother that much with pesky Lutherans. His son was quite another matter. Philip II, who now ruled the Netherlands from Spain, started enforcing the Edict of Blood in the 1560s, just as Calvinism and Anabaptism, which were even stricter and more radical forms of Protestantism, we just saw their attitudes toward art, were taking hold in the Netherlands. And bloody indeed the Edict of Blood turned out to be, but even as they suffered under religious warfare, the Low Countries, as Belgium and the Netherlands were called, prospered as the center of the European economy moved toward the Atlantic, and as the Netherlands in particular replaced Italy as the financial center of Europe. So you have this complicated mix of wealth and religious struggle with recurrences of the plague and the onset of the Little Ice Age to complicate the mix. So I want you to keep this context in mind as we glance briefly at the art of Hieronymus Bosch and then focus on Pieter Bruegel. So yes, this really is thought to be a self-portrait. It's a detail from the Garden of Earthly Delights. If you've memorized that 1517 is the year Martin Luther got out his hammer and nails, and I recommend that you do, then you know that Bosch could not have been a Protestant. But I've included him here not only because he was Dutch, but also because he lived and worked in the era that in many ways gave rise to Protestantism, a time when religion was turning inward, with a focus on personal devotion, when his compatriots were growing ever angrier at what they perceived as abuses in the church, and when many people, probably Bosch included, thought that God was punishing his people for their sins with new outbreaks of the plague and with several decades of bitter cold winter, that weather that historians call the Little Ice Age. Actually, art historians are divided over whether Bosch was a moralist, trying to turn his countrymen away from evil ways, or a satirist who was making fun of the greed and sexual immorality of his time. And maybe he was a loyal son of the church, and maybe he was a proto-reformer. We really don't know, but his works are wild and gripping, and I just couldn't bear to leave him out. So this is a huge triptych, more than 12 feet wide when opened. It was painted for a member of the royal family, not for a church, and some art historians think that like Botticelli's Birth of Venus, it was intended to commemorate a wedding and to be enjoyed in private, a bedroom painting. So here's the triptych in its entire weirdity. We have Adam and Eve on the left, the so-called garden in the middle, and hell on the right. And here's the bizarre scene of hell, including Bosch's self-portrait. I've included a couple of details from the work on the right. The top image comes from the hell panel, and the bottom image comes from the middle or garden panel. Do not ask me to explain why they have blue hindquarters. I can't. There you see the self-portrait. And here's one more detail from the painting. Bet you can guess why Bosch was popular with my fellow students in the 1970s, especially those who were experimenting with dangerous and illegal substances. Finally, we get to our final artist of the unit, and one of my own favorite painters. Wish we had more time. So Bruegel was a master of what art historians call genre painting, that is, painting of ordinary life. He was, in fact, sometimes referred to as Bruegel the Peasant, and here you see a couple of his famous paintings of peasant festivities. Bruegel, in fact, wasn't a peasant. He came from a wealthy family and he had a humanist education. But his paintings do capture the everyday life of ordinary people. And they also capture a world beset by religious conflict and war. So where did he stand in these great conflicts? We don't know. We don't know much about his religious affiliation, whether he remained a loyal Catholic, whether he was attracted to one of the many Protestant sects that came to dominate Holland. We do know that he thought deeply about religion and that he hated the violence that was tearing his country apart. So this is your required work, a real favorite of mine. Before we watch a video clip about this work, let's hear your reactions to its form. How does Bruegel use line and color? How does he establish depth and perspective? I'm not going to add my own thoughts because we're running out of time. But I am going to show you some details from the painting here. Bruegel is all about details. I love to stand close to Bruegel paintings, so close I've been known to alarm security guards, so I can pick up these beautifully rendered little moments of ordinary lives. Let's watch this segment from a very interesting video about the art of winter. I'm going to close, if you still have any time, with a work that does not tend to show up in art history textbooks. It's not as fun as peasant activities or even weary hunters tromping through the snow. Instead, this is a painting that captures Bruegel's vivid and pessimistic vision of the religious wars that were tearing the Netherlands apart. I'll flash a few more details from this wonderful, terrible painting. I realize that we're entering on a rather depressing note. We've come a long way from the confident days of the early Renaissance Florence. In our next unit, we're going to see art of a world that claws back, the art of the Baroque.